I would like to put this forward this morning as a Dharma investigation as opposed to a Dharma talk. And we had some of this investigation yesterday. The Outer Wild Community Zen hosted a half-day retreat. And Ari and I had been talking about wanting to do that locally. And then he had suggested we do it on the occasion of Yom Kippur. So the theme of our retreat was atonement. And that's what I would like to continue to investigate with you today. So that's why I was welcoming Ari in the room, because he was responsible in large part for that theme for us yesterday. And I also want to acknowledge that many of us here have been in the Jukai class together. So the class in which several of you are preparing for formally taking the Buddhist precepts. And so this conversation around atonement is very connected to the Buddhist precepts. So it's very connected to what our intentions are for how we want to live our lives, and then how to be responsible for both when we don't completely live up to that, and also when circumstances are beyond our control that we still feel connected to. So it's been, I think, pretty widely circulated in our circles to sort of look at this word atonement from the perspective of at-one-ment, which is very Zen and Mahayanist and Zen way to kind of, I feel like, give us a portal in. So I'll share some stuff that I already shared yesterday. So anyway, because it really, anticipating having that retreat yesterday had already started the wheels rolling for me around considering what atonement means. And then I am taking a course on current events through UCR down in the desert. And there was some conversation about certain aspects of world events. And I left that conversation feeling quite riled up, because it was not possible to have an exhaustive, and I don't know, an exhaustive conversation is one that will go on and on. But I left feeling really stirred up. And to the point where I invited into my realm of conversation 2 different people to further talk about kind of the dynamics that I was roiled up about, which relates with politics globally. And those conversations were interesting. And what I noticed was I was still feeling angry and angry in a way of wanting a target somehow. And so sitting with that through the week and anticipating us doing a retreat on Saturday just kept being with me. Atonement, at-one-ment, what is, and then also my own churned up feelings. And what kind of finally occurred to me, and it did feel like, it felt like a bit of being on a rat on a cage, but also just this, churning. And I realized that I wanted some kind of way to be able to feel separate from what I was upset about. I wanted to somehow be able to not think that I was personally responsible for Middle Eastern politics. And when I just realized my anger was coming from not wanting to be part of, then the whole kind of way to look at atonement or atonement shifted for me. So I'm going to kind of share some stuff actually directly out of our Jukai books. So some of you, my handbooks, so some of you are already familiar with this because we've been studying it. But to me, it's the kind of thing you can hear over and over and over again. And it sinks in new ways. And why I wanted to put this, and I'm not being tongue-in-cheek, I'm not being, I'm serious in saying that I see this as an investigation, because I'm not proposing answers about it. And in fact, one of the ways right out of the Jukai handbook talks about precepts are an aspect of life, and that precepts reveal the complexity of life, and there are no simple answers. And that precept practice is a matter of how we function in any given situation, and it's not about coming to conclusions. So that just seems very, very fitting with how I've been feeling and looking at things, and also from the perspective of looking at it as an ongoing investigation. So those of us who have been studying the precepts together, and those of you who have studied them in the past, and just to kind of just share, just remind us. Tina, that is a very funny picture of yourself on the Zoom. So what I want to propose as a sort of mechanism, maybe, for considering this atonement, is a few things. One is that, and I was sharing yesterday, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this from this perspective, and I was also sharing yesterday that one of the kind of cheat sheet things to do when you're preparing a Dharma talk is listen to other people who have talked about the same thing. And I could only find one talk that was, and it happened to be from somebody in our lineage who talked about atonement. And initially when I found it, I was like, oh, great, I can just play this for the sitting group on Saturday when we have our Dharma talk time. And then after I listened to it, I mean, early on and listened to it, I feel that it is so important. No, Zen is a non-theistic approach. But, Mahayana Buddhism is a non-theistic approach. And I feel like it is so important for us to be aware of our kind of for most of us, our knee-jerk response to putting things in a good and bad perspective, and especially about ourselves, and using any kind of framework to beat ourselves up with. And that is, I think, in some ways antithetical to the true meaning of atonement. And so I remember my Sumi Roshi saying that that karma is on many levels, and there's personal karma, there's like quote unquote individual karma, there's karma of the community that we're in, there's the karma of the nation that we're in. There's the karma of the globe that we live on. And who knows if there's a intergalactic, pan-galactic karma. So looking at atonement or at-one-ment from the perspective of our own behavior, our own adherence to our own intentions for how to live. And I was looking back at something where she had, actually Saison was cleaning out a closet and she found this piece of paper in which Maezumi Roshi had written down the 3 principles of Buddhism. And he specifically mentions precepts as one of the 3 most important aspects of Buddhism. So looking at the precepts from all these 3 different perspectives, which I'll mention. So looking at atonement from the level of the personal and how our behavior matches with our intentions and all that, kind of just commonsensical, normal kind of way to look at it. And also atonement at one-ment from the perspective of non-separation, which is the most important basic aspect of Zen practice. And I was using that example of myself from the current events class earlier in the week, in that I did not want to see at one-ment from the perspective of I can't separate myself out from this thing that I don't like, that I don't want to be identified with. But it's not possible. And my anger was coming from wanting to not have to be part of it. And there's things that we have more and less control over, but we're still not there. Non-separation is always the case. It's always the fact. And that is basic to our practice. So the aspects of, how we work with the, and I remember one of you, I won't call you out, just because it'll embarrass you, but I remember one of you in the Jukai class saying, "Oh, I'm so relieved we got to the stuff around atonement, because now that's the relief valve for practicing the precepts. There's a way I can make good on this." And I also have seen a number of different conversations, translations, talking about you cannot break the precepts. You cannot break non-killing. We cannot break these moral guidelines, but we can cover them up. In a sense, we can dirty them up at times, but we can't break them. There's nothing to be broken, and we are not broken. We actually have a Sangha member right now who's really, really struggling, and said to me numerous times yesterday on the phone, I feel like I am broken. And I think many of us can relate to that feeling. And it's very heart-wrenching for me hearing him say that. And knowing that there's no way, there's nothing I can say to talk him out of feeling like he's broken right now. Except for to say, I know for a fact you're not broken. So just to kind of review for us, there are 3 different ways of looking at these precepts: a Hinayana sense, a Mahayana sense, and a Buddhayana or Buddha nature sense. In the Hinayana sense, we view these precepts literally. In the Mahayana sense, we view them in a more relative setting, looking at the time, place, people, and amount involved. In the Buddha nature sense, we look at them from the standpoint of no separation, or the oneness of life. When we receive the precepts and when we say that we will maintain them, it means to maintain them in all three senses. So aspirationally, it means to maintain them in all three senses: Hinayana, Mahayana, and Buddha nature. And in the Jukai handbook, it goes on to talk about how do we atone. And the first one is do zazen, actualize the body and mind as one, dissolve all divisions and excuses. With the Idlewild Community Zen group, we've also been reading Uchiyama Roshi's book, Opening the Hand of Thought. And the last chapter that we just read, basically over and over and over again, he's talking about coming back to our basic nature in Zazen and actualizing body and mind as one. And also this dissolve all divisions and excuses. So that's at one, right? To let go of our preferences, let go of what we're trying to push away, let go of wanting it to be different, let go of our excuses for accepting ourselves in life exactly as they are right now, which is all trying to get away from reality. So Zazen is, our core practice from that perspective, not our only one by any means, because this at one-man happens all the time. And we sort of trust the practice of Zazen as a place to formally come home to that. And to, sort of use that as our laboratory to see what comes up that says, no, that's not true, or not for me. And then the second point is be aware. And it says here, be aware of breaking the precepts. So be aware of when we don't fulfill our best intentions, to avoid allowing our anger to color our mind and cause us to cause harm to ourselves and others. The 3 pure precepts: do good for others, don't do harm. That's like so basic. So how when we go against these sort of basic guidelines for living an awakened life, how does it cause us suffering or suffering to those around us? I was so affected by doing the Gate of Sweet Nectar this morning, or chanting it together. And over and over and over again, I raise the Bodhi mind. I am the Buddhas and they are me. Over and over and over again. And it's the gate of sweet nectar. It's like, this is the sweetest thing, to realize we are whole and complete as we are. And we're human beings trying to do this elegant, amazing thing. So at one-man as a tool for self-examination, or doing better, acknowledging, and if everybody hasn't sat, at Sweetwater or I think elsewhere, I think it was mentioned yesterday, they do it at Yokoji. I think just maybe during Sesshin, but at Sweetwater, every morning, the morning sitting starts with the Gatha of Atonement. And I was wishing I had made the time to ask Echo or Saison. I don't remember when that started because it's not like we didn't used to do it a long time ago. But to every morning be able to say, being one from beginningless time with greed, anger, and ignorance caused by my body, mind, and thought. These natural things that come from being a human being. And I atone for it all. I take it all in. And I start fresh every single day, every single moment. So there isn't a staining. There's no staining. I think that's the word I was trying to think about the precepts. Breaking versus staining. And there's always cause and effect. It doesn't mean there's not consequences from our actions and the actions of things that we are connected to that we wish were different. But it's a beautiful thing to be able to have these guidelines for our practice and at the same time know that this at one-ment is always the case. Yeah, and I think what just hit me doing the Gate of Sweet Nectar is this is my life. This is actually who I am. And what a relief. So I feel like remember Roshi going, I don't know what I'm talking about, getting all impassioned and then kind of feeling self-conscious. I just wanted to read you, and I read it yesterday too, but I just really love it. So this is from the Jukai handbook again. And it's entitled On Atonement by Taizan Maizumi Roshi from February of 1991. I'm just going to read you the first two paragraphs. We have 16 precepts. I am reluctant to translate Kai as precepts. Precept has the sense of restriction of committing certain actions, but Kai is something very different. In our tradition, to transmit Kai means to become one, become aware of one's own nature. Bodhidharma defined Jukai by saying that Ju is to receive or transmit. To transmit is to be awakened. To become awakened is to become awakened to one's own true nature. This is called Jukai. So Kai is the patriarchs, matriarchs, directly transmitting, or the Bodhisattva directly transmitting. That's the Kai we maintain. It's very different from 5, 10, 20, 250, 378 rules for nuns and monks to maintain. For the lay people, there's just 10 precepts. These precepts have their own value and significance. But this Kai that we maintain is not something about do this or don't do that. Then what is it? Sometimes we call it Kai and Buddha's Kai. What kind of Kai is that? Sometimes we call it Buddha nature Kai. In a way, it has nothing to do with the numbers. We say 16 precepts, but Buddha nature doesn't have numbers. So what is it? Life, my life, your life, Bodhisattva's life, and Buddha's life. Furthermore, it's the life of anything, everything. That is the Kai that we maintain, and we renew it, having Fusatsu. So it's a ceremony of renewing the vows and of atonement. So kind of going back to where I started with that connection to the world and to our own behavior. It doesn't mean don't do anything. But really do everything possible in our capacity. And I also shared this example yesterday. I was moved actually in two different relationships in my life relative to atonement. I was moved to express my sense of responsibility about aspects of the relationship from in the past. One of them quite a long time in the past, and one more recently. And I got a message back from one of the people that I felt like kind of trivialized my intent, the heart with which I came at it. And it's okay. It's that person's response. But my point was yesterday and today that just because we atone doesn't mean we get the response from the world we want. It doesn't matter. It's how do we live in a way that we are awake in our lives and deeply, deeply feel into our inherent sense of connection that cannot be broken. And that hurts at times. Hurts a lot at times. And the other thing that I sort of shared was in the course of the week, what I realized, which was kind of embarrassing to realize, but what I realized was, in a way, my sense of wanting to separate myself from the kind of karma in a larger global way was more about, I don't want to be identified with that, than it was actually compassion for the people who are suffering tremendously. In a way, it was my ego, my pride, that I don't want to be attached to this. And that's ignorance. So atonement is also being truthful about our motivations. Which, are lots of times involved with how we want to be perceived. So I noticed that I was feeling quite sober this morning because I feel like this has been churning in me for 9 days now, and it doesn't feel done. So I offer it up for your consideration is all as a fait accompli. And to that extent, I take comfort from what was in our Jukai book, handbook, about practice. Precept practice is not about coming to conclusions. There there are no simple answers. And in a way, I remember hearing that, the one time that Zen practice can be seen as kind of nihilistic, that there's no distinct rules. And, from the literal fundamentalist perspective, there's just don't do it. But ultimately, it's always about this moment of our lives and not coming at it from a formulaic perspective, but really being awake now. And like I said, doing our best, and at the same time really realizing we can't fundamentally separate. And we are fundamentally whole. Absolutely. Okay, be happy to hear any comments.